I'm a 24-year-old female from northern Arizona. This was a couple years ago. At the time, I was living out of a small camper van traveling along the West Coast. There's a lot of different lifestyles. People like to live in these types of vans or RVs. I always tried to keep out of the big cities and stick to small towns for camping in between destinations. But for the most part, I like to camp out in the backcountry. Being in the middle of the woods with nobody else around is where I found myself most comfortable and where I most enjoyed the lifestyle of traveling. I think part of it is that it was always safer to be out by yourself in the forest than it was to be stealth camping in a busy parking lot in the middle of a city. Don't get me wrong, it can still get creepy at night, but I always know I'm better off out there with nobody around. This week, I was slowly traveling between two big cities in Washington. I was taking my time staying on the back roads and hunkering down at campsites for several days at a time. On this day, I pulled off the road and onto a small dirt trail going deep into the forest. There were a few pull-off spots, but none were taken, and it looked like nobody had been down here in a while. So I kept going, hoping to secure a larger and more scenic spot. At the end, there was a large circle to pull off on. It wasn't scenic, just surrounded by trees, but it was large and secluded and peaceful, and even had a stone circle in the middle for a campfire. I leveled out my van and parked. Since it was the middle of spring, it was raining pretty much every day here in Washington, so there wasn't much for me to do outside. I opened the side door to my van for some fresh air while I cooked a meal on my propane stove. It was around sunset, so I still had several hours before I'd be in bed. Over the next 30 minutes, the sun fell past the horizon and the rain started picking up. I shut the door to keep the water out, and instead cracked open one of the small windows near the back of the van. I sat on the bed and watched a show on my laptop, but midway through it, a glare came in from the open window behind me. It was a light reflecting onto the screen of my laptop. Before I was able to react, it went away. It didn't move away, though. It turned off as if someone switched the light off. When I turned around and looked out the window, I saw nothing. It was really dark and still pouring down outside. I had no way to know how far the light came from, or what it even was. Being on a trail with other pull-off spots, I had to assume it was just another camper. Maybe their headlights that somehow found its way through the trees and shined into my window, then they quickly turned their vehicle off. The only problem with that was the light didn't come from the road I came down. Behind my window was just trees. Maybe there was another trail I didn't know about. There wasn't much investigating I could do anyway, so I turned back around and went back on my laptop. Occasionally, I'd check out the windows or think I'd heard something outside, but with the rain clinking against the metal roof, it wasn't clear if I was actually hearing something or not. Every time I looked, though, I never saw anything to confirm that something was out there, so I didn't worry myself too much. I want to say it was about 10 or 11 when I decided to call it in for the night and try to sleep. I turned off everything in the van, closed all the windows, and drew the shades. It was nearly pitch black inside. I got under the covers and tried to sleep. Usually, I didn't have much trouble at all, but tonight I just couldn't manage to fall asleep. Unfortunately, the rain picked up even more after an hour, and thunder started rolling in. It was very loud and made it impossible to even try to sleep. About 2 hours into the night, and through all the harsh rain and thunder, I swear I heard something move outside. It was just loud enough for me to know I really heard something. It sounded like someone or something running and kicking over a branch on the ground, somewhere just outside of my van. As soon as I heard it, there were no other sounds. It was so dark, I couldn't even see the ground beneath the window. The longer I looked out there, the more uneasy I felt. I just had this feeling like someone else was looking back at me. I put the window cover back down. I sat there and tried to tell myself I was overreacting, but only a minute later I heard a voice. It was a male voice, kind of in a loud whisper, like they were talking to someone else. I sat in silence, too scared to open the covers and look out the windows again, knowing they'd probably see me if they hadn't already. However, they likely already could assume someone was in the van, which makes it all the more terrifying. There was a good 2 or 3 minutes where I didn't hear anything aside from the rain and thunder, before there was suddenly something outside the sliding side door to the van. It sounded like bending plastic, like someone was leaning against the side door. Then there was a knock. A few seconds later, they knocked again. Even though I was sure they knew I was in here already, I still was too scared to speak. Maybe they weren't sure how many people were inside. Or if I was a man or a woman, so I felt safer not giving them anything and just staying quiet. A very disturbing and anxious 5 minutes went by as the knocking continued every few seconds without anyone saying anything. They had to be drenched by now and probably couldn't see it all through this weather. But then they finally said something. "Sheriff's Department, open up." What? I didn't believe that for a second. If it were true, why wouldn't they have said that from the beginning? They continued knocking and calling out different lines, all basically stating that they were an officer and I needed to open the door. This seemed like a desperate attempt to get me to open up without violence. I slowly lifted the window cover and looked out. All I could see was a dark figure moving near the door, but from the shape of it, it didn't look like he had any sort of law enforcement gear on, so I was sure this was about to get really bad. I debated in my head what to do for 30 seconds, as it felt like the knocking got more and more impatient before I decided to risk getting into the driver's seat and trying to drive away. As soon as I went up there and turned the car on, I heard 2 sets of footsteps running up to the side of the van. I began pulling out just as a figure appeared in the window next to me. Thank God the van didn't get stuck, and I was able to get out onto the trail. As I drove away, I never saw any other vehicle down the road, which makes the intentions of these unknown people likely really disturbing. I put in a report with the county, who of course said no officers were out there that night, but I never got any follow-up. Things could have gotten really bad out there, but I haven't had anything else happen since then.